Hey everybody, I'm The Curse and I'm here to bless you with a build guide. Like you already saw, it's a Manifest Armor Smite build and it completely destroys Julra in under 10 seconds consistently. And hey, this is my first video, so please let me know what you think of it and of the build in the comments below. And I'll be posting more last Epoch and Diablo content, so if you're a connoisseur of refreshing builds, do me a favor and subscribe and keep an eye out for my videos. And now let's get going. Irashaimase. Let me tell you how the build came to be. So I had been trying to make a Smite heal build work for quite a while, and my main downfall that entire time was that I kept relying on Smite for both the main source of DPS and a source of significant healing. And that just doesn't work. You simply don't have enough skill points to spec into both sides of the skill tree. So anyways, that's how I eventually landed on this build. Manifest Armor for your main source of DPS, Smite for heal and cleanse, all of it triggered by your shield throw and the insane attack speed of a Paladin. And as you saw in the video, it's a match made in heaven. It's like croissants and chocolate. They're meant to be together. The insane DPS of Manifest Armor paired with the great utility from Smite is just something that will be incredibly powerful in multiplayer. Really, the only threat to this build is ESG nerfing the Smite idols. So let's hope for the best, but we'll see. More on that later. For now, let's just jump into the basics of the build. You can control your Manifest Armor with the A button, send it towards your enemies, and then you just throw shield right behind it and everything around it dies. So for example, if you're running a monolith, you just send your Manifest Armor towards the enemy and then you charge right in there with it with your lunge. The reason you want to charge in is because you want to be in range of your Smite healing. If you're in range of your Smite heals, you're basically invulnerable. It heals you for a lot and it cleanses you. The biggest threats to you are always going to be ranged enemies. Make sure to target them first. You can always activate your Holy Aura when it's off cooldown. It gives you extra attack speed, some survivability. And then Volatile Reversal is basically your mobility skill as well as a boss fighting DPS increase. So if you're fighting a boss, I'll demonstrate with the next Holy Aura. You can boost your damage significantly like this. And you can see the crits went from 600-700k to 1.3, 1.5 mil crits. So you're almost doubling your DPS thanks to Volatile Reversal. You'll notice we don't have Smite on our skill tab right here. And that's because we don't need it. We're never going to be casting Smite. It's always getting triggered by shield throw. And we can leverage that extra slot for lunge. Even without any skill points in it, it's a great mobility skill. It has 3 seconds cooldown, so it's exactly what we need. Next, let me walk you through the strengths and weaknesses of the build so that you know which areas of the game to focus on and which areas to avoid. It has a great single target DPS, as you already saw in the Julra video. And then Smite is an incredible AoE heal and AoE cleanse, which is a perfect fit for multiplayer. Every party needs a healer, right? And there aren't very many sources of AoE cleanse. So the build also has a solid mobility. Manifest Armor is probably one of the fastest minions in the game. It's quite responsive to your controls. The build's also tanky. Paladin is a great defensive character type. And you get tons of sustain, making you even tankier. The build's easy to use. You just throw your shield and everything dies around your Manifest Armor. And you're also strong without endgame items. So this is a really good build to start a season off with, potentially the multiplayer season, and improve as you go along. In terms of weaknesses, I would say AoE is somewhat lacking. The radius for the spin of Manifest Armor is not that great. The minion AI is not amazing. It probably needs to get patched. So we'll see. Hopefully we get something with 0.9. The build is also a little bit weak versus on-hit monolith buffs. Things like critical strike avoidance, dodge can be a problem. And then next, Manifest Armor's attack animation. It's not that slow, but when this enemy is dead because of the spin, and you're just waiting for your Manifest Armor to finish its attack animation before it moves on to the next enemy, that can get a little bit frustrating. And finally, the sustain of this build is based on hits. So if there are no enemies to be hitting with your shield throw, you're not getting any smites, and so you're not getting healed. That can be a problem in the Lightless Arbor dungeon at the final boss fight, the first stage of it. There are no enemies around. The boss occasionally hurls these meteors at you, which spawn a golem, but the golem dies in one hit, so it doesn't trigger any smites. And so the meteor leaves you at like 10% HP. You kind of have to chug all your potions, and then you're kind of stuck. You can't heal yourself. The second meteor is a huge problem. You might just die then. So this build is not ideal for that fight. I would recommend utilizing a different build to farm your Lightless Arbor. All right, let me walk you through the skills, passives, items, and blessings for the build. So starting with the skills, you can see I have 21 points each, but I'll show you what you can do to just make do with 20. So Manifest Armor, definitely get these 4 skills right here. They boost up the stats that you get from your chest armor, helmet, boots, and gloves. They're amazing. So pretty much every Manifest Armor is going to be utilizing those. And then for your last 4 points, get to Titan Mace. You also get this one as well, which gives 75% more damage for your Manifest Armor. It's a really strong node. And if you have 1 extra point, you can get Force of Impact and pair it with a chest armor that has really high base armor, preferably over 300. For shield throw, you want to get to Manifest Inspiration ASAP, because without that, the build doesn't exist. This is build enabling. The other build enabling one is Shield Barrage. You need it. Otherwise, you have a cooldown on your shield throw. And then after that, make sure to get all of your Ricochet nodes. So that means you get 3 bounces for your shield throw so that you can throw it. It bounces 3 times, meaning that if you're fighting a single target, the shield is going to bounce on them twice. So it's going to apply Armor Shred twice, as well as Physical Resistance Reduction twice. And it's going to trigger your Manifest Inspiration twice. So get all the bounces you can. After that, get your Armoring Aegis, which is a super strong defensive skill. It increases your armor significantly. Here, I'll show you real quick. You can see I start with 1400 armor, which is a 30% reduction. But when I start spamming, I can get it up to 80%. And imagine I'm fighting a boss. That is a significant reduction in damage. And then one last note is Forgeborn. It's really useful to convert your shield throw to have the scaling tag of fire. It becomes a fire skill just with 1 point, 1 value point. You can get little trigger effects like this idol, for example, chance to shred armor on hit with fire skills. Normally that wouldn't trigger unless you have Forgeborn. So it's a neat little trick to keep in mind. For Holy Aura, since we're a paladin, just focus on Fanaticism and Expedite. Those two give you 32% throwing attack speed while passive. And then another 32% when you activate Holy Aura. So 64% throwing attack speed in total. It's absolutely insane. It's why it's so relevant for this build, because we're throwing and every single throw triggers our damage on the Manifest Armor. Then you can get Shelter from the Storm. Good for resistances and endurance. It makes itemization so much easier as well. And then you can do whatever you want with the remaining points, really. I put them in Call to Arms for extra physical damage for our Manifest Armor. And then you can do crit multi. Those are solid. Volatile Reversal. You want to reduce the cooldown as much as possible by taking these 2 notes. Time Lost Vitality and Time Lost Wisdom. We don't need heals. We don't need mana. This build is very self-sufficient with the other aspects of it. And then you want to make sure you trigger Void Rift at start and at arrival. And then get this one to increase enemy damage taken by 30%. So keep in mind that gets triggered twice by these two nodes, at start and at arrival, meaning enemy damage taken is increased by 60%. And it gets applied for 4 seconds, having a 2.4 second cooldown. So there is a 1.4 second overlap of these two harbingers of dust. So the enemy damage taken gets amplified by 120% for a period of time, is what that means. This node is great. More attack speed, why not? We'll take it. And then catching up, just for a little bit extra mobility. And then finally, the best part of this build, my favorite, Smite. Obviously, max Holy Wave, max area. And obviously, max Grace. Smite healing plus 200% more health. Your base health of 60 gets tripled to 180. And it gets multiplied by your increased healing effectiveness. So in my case, we've got 104 increased healing effectiveness, 192 from attunement scaling for Smite, making it about 300%. So you're quadrupling your 180 base heal, meaning you're healing for about 700 health with every single Smite. And you've seen some of the playthroughs. You're casting Smite everywhere. This is why I'm saying that this build is going to be absolutely amazing in multiplayer. I really hope EHG doesn't nerf Smite too much and those idols that cast Smite. So if you're listening, EHG, please nerf only the damage side of Smite. Don't touch the healing side if possible. If you can make some sort of nerf that doesn't touch the healing Smite. And so after that, you want Panacea as well. For cleanse chance, 24%. It's quite significant given that the game does not have very many AoE cleanses. Another great multiplayer skill node right there. And finally, Righteous Fury, even more attack speed. Yeah, you don't want to touch any of these other, what is this, 50% more damage? We don't want that. We don't want that. Those are the skills for this build. Now, in terms of passives, let's start with the base class for Sentinel. Basically, you just want to get to 20 points just to unlock the other classes here. And the least painful way of getting there is using these two nodes. These two nodes are actually quite solid. Reducing cooldown for your lunge, making it 3 seconds, is quite nice. And then 10% damage reduction on nearby enemies, which you're going to be fighting up close just to be in range of your Smite heal. So this is a really good skill. Fearless for a little bit of health, and then Juggernaut for 2 strength. This is really not a good passive for this build because Manifest Armor, as you can see, does not scale very well with strength, just gains health, nothing else. But we're just trying to get to 20 points. Void Knight, Abyssal Endurance, 5 points. This was a good node. Gives you health, resistances. If you have extra points, feel free to throw them in here. This is a pretty nice one. Forge Guard, on the other hand, these are not nice. We just want to get to Manifest Armor, and this is the straightforward way of getting there. 555, nothing to talk about there. And then Paladin. Now here, this is one of the best passive skill trees in the game. It's definitely one of my favorites just because it's so defensively oriented. It makes itemization so much easier. So starting with Defiance, definitely max this out. Attunement, as you saw through the skill walkthrough, it scales both your damage for your Manifest Armor and your tankiness for your Manifest Armor, and your sustain by increasing your healing effectiveness of Smite. So it benefits all 3 of those things. Definitely bump it up, especially given that you get 3% elemental resistances as well from this node. Valor, 15 health and 5% healing effectiveness per point. Really strong node. Max it out. And then Blinding Light, Holy Symbol, Faith Armor. Just kind of play around with those to max out your Crit Strike Avoid, Necrotic Resistances, and get your endurance nice and high. So you can see in my case, I've just exactly maxed out Crit Strike Avoid, exactly maxed Necrotic Resistances, and solid endurance, which gets bumped up by the holy aura. And then dedication, a bit more attunement, can't go wrong. It's not as good as defiance just because we don't need mana regen, but it's all right. Prayer Aegis is really solid, lots of health, good endurance threshold, extra tankiness, so bump it up, max it out even if you have the extra points. And then Divine Essence, I think this is probably one of the few builds that can leverage this node and do it so effectively. You'll be healing everybody around you, yourself, your allies all the time. And so you easily hit that 3 maximum Divine Essences at once. So you're going to be getting 30% armor and 30% healing effectiveness boost through this, value 2 points. So I'd say it's worth it. But if you really don't want it, you can take him out. And then Reverence of Duality, the most OP passive node in the game. Max it out. Don't even think about it. And then Light of Raye. It's not that great for this build just because the fire and lightning damage doesn't benefit it. But I really like move speed. That's just a personal preference of mine. You could probably take out a bunch of points and distribute them across maybe Prayer Aegis, some of the other skills. The other nodes are not really relevant for this build. In terms of blessings, armor here from this one, physical resistance shred from this one, get it up to 50%. This is the best one by far for this build, the most relevant one. And 20% all-res here. I really like this node just to make my itemization easier. There's also a crit strike avoidance one here that you can take. And those are the 3 most impactful ones. You can get a little bit of health here, but nothing to brag about. Now let's go into the items. I'll quickly go through the idols just because they're super straightforward. You want to get these unique kind of cast smite on throwing attack idols. You want to get as high percentages as possible on all 4, preferably 9% for sure. And then suffixes, they have health, they have shred on throwing attacks. So those are the suffixes that you want. And then for the small little idols, get your resistances maxed out, and then armor, health, nice little bonuses right there. And now let's go into the items. So I'll start with my favorite part of this build from the item composition, and that's the helmet. It is the perfect synergy for this build between Peak of the Mountain helmet and the Smite healing component. You can see this is a really powerful helmet, 283% increased critical strike chance, which gets quadrupled. So it becomes 1100 or so increased critical strike chance for your Manifest Armor. So it takes your 5% base crit chance all the way up to like 60, 65, 70%, something like that, depending on your role. And the only downside is you cannot leech health from critical strikes. And normally, for most other builds, that's a pretty significant downside. A lot of builds have sustain based around life leech, and they're always critting. So taking this helmet is out of the question because you have 0 sustain at that point. But for us, we've got Smite, and Smite is such a good sustain, you don't care about this. And not only that, it makes your itemization easier because now you don't need to itemize for life leech for your Manifest Armor. You don't need the ring that gives minion life leech. You don't need life leech on your weapon or your gloves. Those are free prefixes that you're opening up for more damage. Other than that, the other great thing about this helmet is the effective level for legendary potential is 0. And that means that it can spawn with up to 4 LP if you're really lucky, or if you run that boss enough times. And if you get 4 LP, let me know. Send a link to your helmet in the comments. I want to see these helmets. I just want to see what everybody else has gotten. But yeah, this one's mine. 3 LP. I managed to land both of the prefixes that I wanted. And you can see between the two, that's 125% increased melee damage. Times 4, that's 500% increased melee damage for your minion. So definitely you always want to get those increased melee damage prefixes. Even though you don't have Vengeance, you don't have Smelter's Wrath. It's all for that Manifest Armor benefit from this node right here. Great helm. The other alternative for helmet is Prismatic Gaze to get your crit if you wanted to do that through the helmet. It's decent. However, I do believe best in slot is Peak of the Mountain just because of that synergy with Smite. And quite honestly, the resulting crit chance between the two options is quite comparable. Not to mention that this one will never spawn with 3 or 4 LP. Next, for the weapon, I'll walk you through 3 different options. The first one is Apathy Small. If you get 1 or 2 LP, I would aim for increased flat physical damage. And I had a tier 7 flat physical damage whiff here, unfortunately. But I did get the increased minion melee damage. This is a really solid weapon for the build. It has increased melee damage, which gets passed onto your Manifest Armor. Has increased physical damage, increased minion physical damage, really high base damage. It's all great stuff. Option number 2 is Leviathan Carver. Very similar, close to 200 flat damage, 270% increased percent damage, physical penetration as well. So it's a very, very similar stat line. However, it has the downside of not being able to avoid critical strikes. Sure, it does reduce them by 70%, the damage coming in from them. But I find that's not enough. I've tried it out and it's quite painful when you get crit. It's still 130%. So it is an option. It is viable, especially if you get like a 2 LP one, which is not very likely, but it's possible. Again, I whiffed trying to get my tier 7 flat physical damage into it. But with that, I think it would be quite comparable to the Apathy Small. And then finally, option 3, this one's pretty cool as well, is dual wielding. If you read Titan's Mace in description here, it says scales with your equipped weapon stats. And so it's not very clear what that means for dual wielding. And you can test it out. And what ends up happening is it actually adds all of the damage and all of the affixes between the 2 weapons. So it's actually pretty good for Manifest Armor to be dual wielding. Unfortunately, it does make it so that you take 15% increased damage, so it's not great from that perspective. But I'll walk you through the option because RX Bones is really a best in slot for if you want to try dual wielding Manifest Armor. And that's because your Manifest Armor is going to double dip from that increased armor shred effect bonus and the armor shred on hit. Because it says for you and your minions. The base physical damage for RX Bone is great as well, 108. And you can see yet another tier 7 physical flat damage whiff on my part for this one. So all in all, I'm quite salty between these 3 weapons to not have rolled any of them with the tier 7 physical flat damage. But I did get armor shred on hit, and that's not bad for this RX Bones. And then finally, the offhand has to be a sword. I'd recommend a katana. A little bit more crit strike multi. And for the prefixes, you can go for a little bit of tier 5 crit strike. You don't need more. At tier 5, you're already maxing out your crit strike chance at 100% thanks to the helmet. And then other than that, flat physical damage, percent increased physical damage, suffixes of increased minion melee damage are solid. Armor shred, obviously. Those are the 3 options for weapons that I would recommend. And then next, let's go into boots. Not much to talk about. This is the best in slot boot. Get movement speed in your LP if you can roll it. Chest armor, I would recommend Solarium plate just because of the crit strike avoidance. And then prefixes, 100% make sure you have that increased melee damage because it gets tripled for your Manifest Armor. So mine, you can say, have around 200%, triple that, 600% increased melee damage, not too bad. Between all your suffixes, try to offset some of this negative physical resistance for your Manifest Armor, just to make them a little bit more survivable against physical damage. And then the rest is just max out your res, max out your crit strike avoid, and then get health. The suffixes are pretty straightforward. Make sure you get frailty on hit from your relic. And then in terms of prefixes, there are 3 item slots that can get throwing attack speed, the rings and the gloves. I recommend make sure you have throwing attack speed in all 3, at least tier 5. It doesn't have to be tier 7 because it doesn't really scale as well as some of the other prefixes when they go from tier 5 to tier 7. And then other prefixes you want to think about are crit strike chance for the gloves, attunement, minion damage, minion health, are the other 4 ones for your rings and belt. The other thing I can mention for your gloves, this unique pair right here, Fighting Chance. It has a 72% increase melee damage, 75 if you get it maxed. Quadruple that, it's 300% increase for your minion. And it has a really low effective level, so it can fairly easily spawn with 3 or 4 LP. And 5% movement speed doesn't hurt either. 6% increased damage taken is a little bit annoying, but it's not as much as dual wielding, for example, so you can deal with it. And so yeah, between the bracers and the helmet, the Manifest Armor has about 80% crit strike chance. Here's another option for your chest piece, just from the base stats of the armor. It adds a little bit more crit strike chance to boost that 80% to something like 90%, but the armor is lower and it does not have critical strike avoidance. So I prefer this one. And finally, if you want to go full meme, this is the only use case I could find for Julra's Star Dial. Something that gets snapshotted. So if you want to go full meme, you can snapshot your minions damage by putting on these 2 rings and then using a movement skill, charge, and then recreating your Manifest Armor. And that's going to effectively raise your damage by, in my case, it's around 20-30%. So it's not bad at all. But anyway, that's just for memes. EHG are going to patch that, so don't get too attached to that meme. And to wrap up the item section, I have something special for the dedicated nerds out there. For those of us who feel compelled to fire up a spreadsheet just to min-max our DPS. I've got 4 different options for you on how to get really, really high critical strike chance for your Manifest Armor. So here we go. Option 1, Peak of the Mountain, the same one that I have, 283% crit strike chance, and bracers that have a combined 103% crit strike chance. So you can notice there's no incremental base critical strike chance. We're just working with the 5% by default. And then here we have the increased critical strike chances from the various pieces. The final crit that you get is 83%. So it's very close to 100. And in fact, if you get tier 7 crit strike chance on your gloves, this can go up theoretically up to 140. But if we put it 135, just to be reasonable, you can get up to 90% crit strike chance just between these 2 pieces. For option 2, we have that Prismatic Gaze with 4% crit strike chance incremental to the base and 40% increased critical strike chance. And the same gloves. You can see that this is overkill. Now the funny part here is if we take out the gloves out of both of these first 2 options, Peak of the Mountain outperforms Prismatic Gaze. And that's what I was talking about. And really, if you're just running the Prismatic Gaze and you have a good roll, all you need is 50% crit on your gloves and you're already maxed out. So keep this in mind. And option 3 is if you really want to just add crit chance into your Apathy Maw. I have a tier 7 one here. And you can see 18 plus 5%. With the gloves, easily over 100%. So even if you have a weak roll, you're still good. And finally, I have the dual wielding option. If you're running a 5% crit in your offhand with Peak of the Mountain, so then you don't even need to worry about gloves. Gloves we have at 0%. And so with this option, you're also above max. And really, you only need 3%, so a tier 3 prefix for your offhand to max out at 100%. So there you have it. 4 different options to take your Manifest Armor crit chance to almost 100% or even over 100%. And remember, stay true to your inner nerd and min-max to your heart's content. Some of you might be wondering, why Paladin and not Forge Guard? Well, I've got 3 reasons for you. The first one is the DPS. It's kind of a wash. Forge Guard gets this passive node, which is basically 60 physical damage, flat damage for your Manifest Armor. That's decent, but your Manifest Armor already has like 200-300 flat physical damage, so it doesn't help it all that much. This node It would be nice for a sword, but unfortunately it says melee attack speed, so it doesn't help throwing attacks. And so if you actually run Paladin instead, you get Holy Aura. And with Holy Aura, you get 32% increased throwing attack speed permanently, as well as another 32% when you activate it, and a whole bunch of other buffs. So all in all, the DPS, it might be even better for Paladin. Second reason, the defensive passives for Paladin are just way, way better. It's not even comparable. And finally, I don't have a Forge Guard. And that's the build guide, folks. Hope you enjoyed it, and I hope you get a chance to try the build out as well. I'll leave you with a 460 corruption monolith running in the background while I wrap things up. And I'll also add a link to the build planner and my Discord in the comment section below. So check those out if you want. For my next video, I'm planning on a Necromancer build, another minion build likely, so stay tuned. But before I go, I really want to express my appreciation for EHG and the last Epoch community. From everything I've seen so far, EHG are doing a phenomenal job of iterating over that initial MVP that they created a few years ago and delivering content patch after patch and bringing us all back into the game that we love to try new things out. And I'm really hyped for 0.9 and 1.0, and I just want to say, keep it up, EHG. We're all cheering for you, and I think 1.0 will be amazing. And also, the last Epoch community is super helpful, friendly, and tight-knit. Every single question gets answered on the in-game chat or on the forums. Tons of healthy discussions as well. And the last Epoch Tools website is invaluable to creating builds, to figuring out what happened since the last patch. And finally, the content creators of last Epoch have all been producing great content. I can't tell you how many videos I've watched to learn about new builds, to give me ideas for new builds, to understand game concepts. It has been super valuable for me. So thanks everybody, and a special shout out to Perry the Pig and Dread. I think I've watched their videos the most. So keep it up, guys. You're doing an amazing job. And I think that is it. Thanks everybody. Gochiso sama deshita.